last speaker for this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is Kim Payno. She's come with us this evening from the University Admission Centre. She'll be able to speak to you tonight about the differences between your HSC mark and your actual ATAR. She can bust the myths that you've heard about scaling as well, and also give you some practical steps on how to apply for university. So with all that wealth of knowledge behind her, let's make Kim very welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to see so many faces on a very inhospitable evening, so I do thank you for coming out, and I do hope I can live up to those high expectations. I'll do my best. If you thought you were suffering information overload prior to me, I'm sorry, but I think I'm just going to add to that, but I'll try to do it as simply as I can. Unfortunately, scaling and things like that can be rather complicated, so I have tried to make my presentation as simple as I can, and if you have questions later, of course, more detailed ones, I'll be happy to hang around afterwards if you want to come and really quiz me on the finer statistical points of scaling and ATAR calculation, which I won't bore the whole crowd with. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to be talking about is what I can impart to you about UAC and the ATAR in a fairly short presentation. Just in case nobody knows what UAC or UAC, I think most people say UAC, is and what we do. We basically process applications for undergraduate courses at all the unis in New South Wales and the ACT. We have got a few other participating institutions. They tend to be on the borders, so the Griffith University Gold Coast campus, that type of thing. But essentially, if you want to go to any university in New South Wales and the ACT, including the lovely Macquarie, then you apply through UAC. We process applications for EAS, which we've already mentioned, and I'll touch on again, and equity scholarships, which Brian also mentioned. We also, and this is, if I had a soundtrack, this is where we'd have the dun-dun-dun, we calculate the ATAR in New South Wales and tell you all about it, and hopefully answer your questions about it too. So hopefully I can put a bit of comfort around that process for you this evening. Now, depending on what there's a mixed group here. We've obviously got lots of parents, which is fantastic. We've got, I think, some Year 10 students, some Year 11 and some Year 12 students. So depending on what stage you are in that process, there are different things that you need to know from UAC. So if you're in Year 10, you need to start to get an understanding of the ATAR, particularly how it relates to choosing your HSC subjects. So I'm going to cover a bit about that. If you're in Year 11, of course, you still need to know about the ATAR and some understanding of what you're going to be in for in Year 12 when you need to apply, and getting some basic ideas about where you're headed. In Year 12, we're obviously getting serious. In Year 12, you need to know specifically about the ATAR and what's going to happen with that process, about how uni selection works and what you need to do to apply, and what you want to study and where. So some really hard decisions in Year 12, obviously. And parents, well, ideally you know all of it so you can help your children through this sometimes fraught process towards uni admission. So I'm going to start with the ATAR because that's probably the one most people have questions about and certainly worries about. What is it? Well, essentially it's all about position. It's a number that shows your position relative to other students, and that's really critical. It's not a mark, it's a rank. So if a student's overall performance places them in the top 15% of their age group, their ATAR is 85. So that seems quite straightforward, doesn't it? That part of it is, at least. There are some very key differences between the HSC and the ATAR. When you get your HSC marks, what they're telling you is how you performed against the standards for each of your HSC courses. So for every single HSC course, there's a set of standards. How well did you do against meeting those standards? That's what your HSC marks are telling you. Quite differently, your ATAR is actually telling you how you're ranked overall against all the other students in New South Wales in your age group. So it's quite a different thing. So with your HSC marks, we're talking about your performance against standards, but with the ATAR, we're talking about your position. Now the thing about that is you can perform really well, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee a very high position, because position depends on how everyone else went as well as you. But the only thing you can control is your own performance, obviously. You can only do your best and see how the chips fall and how everybody else does, and that will obviously influence your position in the end. But as you can't control how everyone else does, you can only control your own performance. That's the thing you really should focus on. I always like to give this example just to really highlight the difference between HSC marks and position, which is what the ATAR is telling you. We always have this example of Fred and Laura. Now on the left-hand side of the table, they're Fred's marks. I'm sorry, boys, but we give Fred the lower marks, and we always make Laura the high achiever here. Fred and Laura do exactly the same subjects in the HSC, but for everything Fred gets 70, and for everything Laura gets 80 for their HSC marks. So it doesn't seem like a huge difference in performance, but Fred's ATAR is 58.20 and Laura's ATAR is 79.80. So quite a massive difference in ATAR. And the reason is that their positions in their courses are very different, even though they only differ by 10 marks. Lots and lots of HSC students get marks in Band 4, which is marks between 70 and 80. So there's a big clump of students in that band. So if you're at the bottom of that band compared to the top of that band, so if you're Fred versus Laura, there's quite a significant difference in your ATAR when we then go to rank everyone. Because all that big clump of students, when we stretch it out to put everyone in position, you get a big gap. So if you're the type of student that's hovering around 70, if there's anything you can do to get closer to 80, I would really recommend it. It makes a huge difference to get at the top of Band 4, sort of heading towards Band 5. Because as I said, most students do get those marks between 70 and 80. Okay, there's some really very boring, I suppose, but rules about ATAR that you need to know and be sure of when you're choosing your HSC courses, and also as you're studying through your HSC to make sure you're actually going to be eligible for an ATAR, because the rules around ATAR eligibility are slightly different to HSC eligibility. Essentially, you need 10 units, including at least 8 units of Category A courses. Now, all the courses in the HSC are categorised as either A or B. The Category B courses tend to be the vocational courses that are offered through TAFE, so things like automotive and those sorts of courses. But you can include 2 units of a Category B course, but you can't include any more than 2 units, because essentially the categorisation is there to show the difference in the academic demands of those courses. So Category A courses tend to be more academically demanding, and so they're a better preparation for university study. That's why we make sure that ATAR eligibility has 8 units of Category A. You have to include 2 units of English. Doesn't matter whether it's your worst subject, it's still going to be in there. You need to have 3 courses of 2 units or more and 4 subjects. So they're just the basic rules, and your school obviously will help you through this. When we calculate the ATAR, we're basing it on your scaled marks. So that's quite a different thing to your HSC marks, and I'll talk a bit more about scaling in a moment. But your HSC marks and your scaled marks are not the same at all. And we do often get people confused because they're looking at their HSC marks one day, they get all those marks, and then looking at their ATAR the next day and wondering why it's so different. When we calculate the ATAR, we use your best 2 units of English. As I said, we have to include English, that's compulsory. And then the best 8 units from your remaining courses. And these are the best scaled units, not necessarily the best HSC marks. And that's a very common thing at ATAR time. We get lots of students ringing up because they got a higher HSC mark in one course than another, but it wasn't counted in their ATAR, and they can't understand that. And the reason is that we're working with scaled marks. So just because something's a higher HSC mark doesn't necessarily mean it'll be a higher scaled mark. Scaling, this is this horrible beast, and as I said, I don't have hours and hours and a background in statistics to go through all the ins and outs of it, but just what you need to know essentially about it is why we do it. And the reason is that we need to be able to compare all the different courses and combinations of courses that HSC students present with. I think the number last year was the different numbers of patterns of study in the HSC cohort was over 27,000. So in an HSC cohort of 70,000 students, 27,000 different patterns of study are presented. So the key there is how do you compare all those different patterns of study? How do you make them equivalent? And the process of scaling is meant to make those results equivalent in the best way possible. Essentially, when you're when we derive a scaled mark for a course, what we're trying to do is work out what your mark in that course would have been if everyone had studied that course. Because of course each course has quite different candidatures and different abilities in those courses. Some courses have thousands and thousands of students enrolled in that course with very variable academic abilities, while other courses have a very select group and they're all high achievers. So it's trying to make those different course candidatures equivalent and the results that you get in those courses somehow equivalent. That's what scaling is meant to do. There are a lot of scaling myths, and the promise was that I'd bust them. Of course, we get a lot of, some courses are always scaled up, so I'll have to do those. Also get some courses are always scaled down, so I'll obviously have to avoid those ones. With both of those, there's no sense of it always happens that way, because every year with the new set of HSC results, we do the scaling process afresh. So it's not as though we're just using historical data, we use the results from that particular year. So when we do the scaling and calculate the ATARs this year, it'll be based on the 2013 HSC results, not last year or the year before. Having said that though, of course some courses tend to have similar results from year to year, because as I said, some courses have relatively small candidatures, and those small candidatures may well be all clumped around a certain level of achievement. So some courses tend to attract high achieving students and they're a relatively small group. So courses like that may typically get scaled up, but it's not as though it's just an automatic thing. Every year the results are taken and we scale from those. Of course, the most common thing is that people feel as though they have to study certain subjects, certain hard subjects, or whatever term you might like to use, to get high scale marks and therefore to get a good ATAR. This is the myth that we detest the most. The fact that the use of the word hard is such a subjective term. What's hard for one student may be an easy subject for another student, so we can't really have that concept. It's very much an individual thing. And if you're trying to have a one-size-fits-all approach, that is not recognising the individual talents and interests of each student. I think the really important thing is that each student needs to make a choice for them. What is their interest? What is their talent? What are they wanting to do later? It's not as though every student has to do a set pattern of study to get a high ATAR. As I said, there are all these different combinations of courses, but even in the very, very high achieving groups, so if we're looking at the top students in an ATAR sense that get 99.95, they have varied patterns of study as well. They didn't all do Maths Extension 2, Physics and Chemistry. If you're good at Maths Extension 2, Physics and Chemistry, that's great. Choose those subjects. But you don't have to do well. That's the key message. So as I say, the only way you can maximise your ATAR is by working to your own potential. It's not true that your ATAR is influenced by the subjects you choose or the school you attend. That gets bandied about a lot as well, that the school matters, only in the sense of course the school you attend matters, but it's not as though we use it in the ATAR calculation and give you a few extra points for a particular school. It's just not part of it at all. So in terms of ATAR calculation, the most important thing you can do is choose the subjects that you're going to be best at and work hardest at. So for Year 10s out there, what we always say is choose courses that you're interested in, you're good at, and are relevant to what you want to do. As I said, it's important to make sure you'll be eligible for an ATAR if uni entry is what you're after. For each course that you could be interested, there's often prerequisites or assumed knowledge. It's good to have a look at those. Every year UAC puts out a booklet for Year 10 students choosing their HSC subjects, and it lists for all the courses at our universities whether prerequisites are applicable or even assumed knowledge or recommended studies. So you can have a look at that. A classic example would be something like engineering. Typically mathematics would be a prerequisite or an assumed knowledge for that. So you can tailor your courses depending on what you're planning on studying as well. Ignore any advice that tells you you have to choose certain subjects to get a high ATAR. It's really not true, and those very high ATAR students have done all sorts of different subjects. It's just that they've done really well in them. Now that I've talked about the ATAR and choosing subjects, this is more slanted to the Year 12s in the audience, and we're talking about the steps to applying, because that's going to be upon us before we know it really, already in the middle of the year, and our applications open in August, so it's all starting to ramp up for us at UAC. There's basically 4 steps. You need to prepare, you need to obviously apply. Once you've applied, you need to manage your application, and then at the end, hopefully, the good news is you get to accept your offers. In the preparation phase, the 3 key things that I want to talk about are your UAC PIN, the UAC guide, and choosing your courses. Now, the UAC PIN, Year 12 students, you need a UAC PIN to apply. When you go into our application, you need to know your Board of Studies student number and your UAC PIN. Your UAC PIN will be sent to you by UAC in early August. It is different to your Board of Studies PIN. So don't be one of the thousands that call us every year saying, I'm putting in my PIN and it's not working, because they're using their Board of Studies PIN. So you need your student number and UAC PIN. When you get your UAC PIN, it'll be on the special secure paper, like when you get a credit card or a bank account. The reason is you're meant to be keeping it secure. It's your PIN, and this is relating to your application. So you're not really meant to share it with anyone unless you specifically want them to go in and fiddle with your application. Because unfortunately, we do get every year anguished calls from students who have gone in to have a look at their preferences, and they're different to the ones that they chose, because mum or dad has gone in and changed their preferences for them because they want them to do accounting, even though the student doesn't. So yes, mums and dads, I'm sure none of the parents here tonight would ever dream of doing something so horrible, but there are parents like that. Okay, so keep that secure. The UAC guide, the 2013/14 guide is coming out soon. It's just gone off to the printer. It'll be available from schools in July, and Year 12 students, you do get a free copy from your school. It essentially has all the general information from our participating institutions and course descriptions for all the courses available. And of course, importantly, the table of courses with the previous year's cut-offs, which does give you some guide as to what the cut-offs might be next year. When you choose your courses, obviously you're going to check out the Uni Open Days. The Macquarie one will be coming up in September, and then there's a whole raft of them. You'll be probably tired from tramping through all the different campuses, but it's important that you do your research. And again, it's a bit like the HSC selection. You're looking to be choosing things that interest you with subjects that you're good at, because you don't really want to go to all this trouble only to drop out or fail in the first year. When you go to apply, there's essentially 3 things that you can do through UAC: apply for uni, apply for scholarships, the equity scholarships that Brian mentioned, and also EAS. When you apply to uni, it's just an online application through the UAC website. As I said, our applications are opening in August. It's a really, really, really good idea to apply by our on-time closing date, which is the 27th of September. The reason is there's late fees after that. And I'm sure you can think of much better things to do with the $120 or however much it is than just giving it to UAC. So if you apply before the end of September, then you just pay the standard processing charge, which for Year 12 students is, I think, $27. Now, you've got 9 choices you can make in your list of preferences. When you first apply, you don't have to have that finalised. Of course, you don't even know your ATAR yet, so you really just you can just put in anything. You can just put in one course just to get your application in. You can put in all 9 and be quite happy with those, that's fine. But most Year 12 students just put in some ideas at first, and they can go in later and change them. Obviously, most people change them once they get their ATAR, because that's when they're going to have a better idea of what they can get into. You need to pay processing charge, as I said, and you can print your confirmation, so you've got all that tucked away well before HSC exams, and you don't have to think about it again until you get your ATAR. As I said, Equity Scholarships is an online application through UAC. Other scholarships, like all the wonderful array of merit scholarships that Brian was talking about, it's obviously a direct application to the particular uni. There are Commonwealth scholarships as well that are having some changes possibly for next year. That's all handled through Centrelink, so that there are government scholarships available as well. EAS, as we've been talking about, and we've already had a bit of information about this, so I won't dwell on it too much, educational access schemes to help students who've experienced long-term disadvantage beyond their control. As Julia was mentioning, there are 6 broad categories, and within those there are a number of different types of disadvantage that you can claim if that is the case. And I would encourage anyone who has any of those to make an application. Once you've done all that, you've got to manage it. So we're looking at your selection rank, bonus points, yet again, that keeps coming up, and the check and change facility on USC's website. Now, your selection rank essentially is your ATAR, but when we're talking about bonus points, and as Julia was showing in her examples, when you get bonus points, that changes the rank that unis use when they're selecting students. So it will be now your ATAR plus any bonus points you get. Your ATAR doesn't change, and I think I was very thankful to Julia for saying that, because every year we get people ringing up after they've gotten their ATAR advice notice saying, oh, but I got bonus points, can you print me a new advice notice? Well, no, because your ATAR is your ATAR, it's not going to change. What has changed is the rank that a uni is using for a particular course, if you've attracted bonus points for that course. Because it's all course specific, if you've got 9 preferences, you could potentially have 9 different selection ranks, which is why I totally agree with what Julia was saying. It's important to do some research on this, because it can be a little bit confusing. So depending on what HSC performance you have and the different bonus points applicable, you can have different selection ranks for each one of your preferences. So it's something that you do have to keep on top of. Okay, as we know, there are different criteria. We've talked about subject bonuses, regional bonuses, and for EAS. I've just got a quick slide here to show you how it works with the cut-offs. Essentially, the cut-offs are inclusive of any bonus points. What the cut-off is telling us is what was the lowest rank for the last person who was offered a place in a course. So for my example here, we've got the Bachelor of Sandology. Sounds like fun. Very, very, very competitive course. Only 3 places available, and we had 6 applicants. So you can see in blue, those numbers, they're the selection ranks of all the applicants placed in from highest to lowest. So our highest person with 89, they got an ATAR of 89, so that's their selection rank. They didn't get any bonus points. The second person had a selection rank of 88, because they had an ATAR of 83, but they were lucky enough to get 5 bonus points. The third person into the course, which was the last person into the course, had 87. They had an ATAR of 85 plus 2 bonus points. Now the cut-off for that course is 87, because that was the lowest rank accepted into that course. Not the lowest ATAR, because the lowest ATAR accepted into that course was actually 83. And interestingly, there was at least 2 people who had ATARs higher than that but didn't get an offer. As you can see there, persons 4 and 6 have higher ATARs than the person who got an offer at place 3 there, but they didn't get the same benefit of bonus points. So it is quite important to have a good understanding of how this is going to work and how it affects cut-offs. And this is why, of course, people do get places in courses even though their ATAR is not meeting the cut-off, because they've had some bonus points applied and they've got a place that way. Okay, check and change on our website. Once you've applied, you basically use that to change your preferences. You can do that as often as you like. There are deadlines though for main round, which is when most offers are made. You've got until the 4th of January. It's really critical because unfortunately, as nice as we are at UAC, none of our deadlines can move. So if you apply after the 28th of September, I'm sorry, we are going to take more money off you. If you miss the change of preference deadline, I'm sorry, it's too bad. We really have to be deadline driven, and we never feel good about it when we get those anguished calls the day after a deadline, but you really, really have to do it by the deadline, please. I really don't want to upset you by telling you no when you ring up the day after. Obviously, when we get to the good bit, you get to accept your offer. We always encourage people to accept their main round offer, and they need to follow whatever the institution instructions are about that carefully, rather than mess it up and let their offer go. And you can keep your options open even when you accept an offer. You can change your preferences for later offer rounds and maybe get something even better. So you can sort of play the game, I suppose, and get all sorts of different offers, and in the end decide which one you really, really want. Maybe Macquarie. And that was all I had to say. I know that was a lot. I'm really sorry we had to sort of race through a lot of info there, but I'm happy to hang around if anyone's got any particular questions, and that would be great. Thank you.